Y'all knew this one was coming. Oh, and I know this is the wrong shirt, but I'm not getting that polka dot shirt. Ever. Kill the Moon. One of the most notorious episodes of this series of Capaldi's run, by some estimates possibly of New Who in general. People really don't like this one. And now, it's been a very long time since I made this video. I don't really stand by its contents anymore, but I do remember people shouting the name of this one, along with another one I'll be dealing with later this series, as to why was this not on my list of worst episodes of New Who. Oh boy. So there's always a lot of issues here, and depending on who you ask, what the problem is varies quite greatly. So there are some who will tell you the problem is this is possibly the most nonsense science that Doctor Who has engaged in. There are some who say it is bad because of the ham-fisted abortion allegory that people see in it. And some people will say it's bad simply because it appears to be there, and some people will say it's bad because it's poorly handled. I'm going to do my best to try and tackle all of these aspects, but there's a lot that doesn't quite work here. That said, it starts out fairly solid. I honestly am not entirely sure I get why Courtney Woods is in this episode. Not to the extent that I was like, why are Angie and Artie here for Nightmare in Silver? It's not that bad. And I know I said I kind of liked like the little one-off trip the Doctor took her on at the end of The Caretaker, but that didn't mean I wanted her coming along on another trip after that. I don't entirely know what her presence is meant to serve, other than to, I guess, give a 2-to-1 vote on the issue among the 3 remaining characters when the Doctor just waltzes off at towards the back end of the episode. That said, she's not the worst thing in the world. She's not super annoying. I just don't entirely know why she's there. I do like the atmosphere and the sense of foreboding in the front end of it. Especially with things like the Doctor, you know, using the yo-yo and be like, what's wrong with the moon? The gravity's wrong. This should not be working like this. This shouldn't be working at all. What's going on? And this notion of, well, the moon is a heck of a lot denser than it should be. That is an interesting initial hook. And, you know, I also kind of like the idea that there's barely spacefaring technology. I like the not that far in the future and this idea that people stopped caring about space travel, which honestly is something we've kind of been seeing getting played out in real life. NASA keeps losing funding, and all the new launches, they're all private companies, which this thing even has. You know, the base that they go to, it was an exploratory exposition. They say from Mexico, but I don't think they identify it as being government. They were there for a mining survey. I would buy that was private. So I kind of like, especially how much the Doctor as a character and the show as a whole tends to emphasize this idea of humans off to take their destiny in space, but like realistically, there's at least going to be a period where we're just kind of, space, whatever. And I kind of like that this has that going on as a background feature, and it actually plays into the story as to why they land in this what is for them really out-of-date piece of equipment, just loaded up haphazardly with these bombs. I like how that element is worked into the story and how it goes forward. Once we start getting into what's actually going on, that's when things start to come apart. So, Oh boy. So the moon is an egg. And there's moon spiders for some reason. Yeah, I know they're identified as bacteria, which I suppose that'll start with the soft science nightmare that this episode is. And, like, let me be clear, I can deal with a lot of iffy science from Doctor Who, but I prefer my iffy science to be a version of, this is a piece of technology that just does things that probably technology isn't ever going to be able to accomplish. I can roll with that. I can roll with time travel, faster than light travel, the sonic screwdriver. I can roll with all that. They are futuristic, advanced, or alien pieces of tech. That's fine. Where the show can lose me is where it takes things that we have actual scientific knowledge about and just fudges it really badly. That's the kind of soft science that I can take me out of the story. So these bacteria, which first of all, if they are just bacteria, fine that they look like spiders, I suppose, but why are there webs everywhere if they're not spiders? Why are there cobwebs all over everything? That never gets answered. So once we find out what these things actually are. So that's a nitpick. That is a minor nitpick on this thing. Trust me, we got bigger fish to fry. But this is gonna sound really weird because I can go with the idea of like shrinking down for things like the Tesseract or Into the Dalek. Even if I don't love it, I'm like, fine, I'll roll with it. But just because you're dealing with something that is larger than normal doesn't mean that all the other things that would exist on that thing on a normal scale are also scaled up. I.e., bacteria is still microscopic, even if the egg that it's on is massive. Bacteria does not suddenly become the size of a Dalmatian. That's not how anything works. But again, those things are really just there to give us a couple of jump scares and take out some of the team and that, like, move on from those. So, the egg and the debate. Do we kill it? So, the thing is, I actually have not been able to confirm whether or not this is actually intended to be an allegory for abortion, the pro-life versus pro-choice debate. I'm not 100% convinced that it is. And I'd heard word, I feel like I'd read somewhere, but I couldn't dig it up again, that the writer, who's Peter Harness, had said that that was not his intent with crafting the story, to make it an allegorical abortion story. But I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't find that again. But even if he didn't intend it to be that, it does read as that regardless, especially in the way the debate is framed and worded. And the defenses for or against it are going to draw that comparison. That being said, if it is meant to be an allegory for abortion, it's a really bad one, because it fails on its starting premise. Because there are some hardcore anti-abortion people who say never, 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 never. But most people, the majority, by a pretty sizable amount, agree that abortion is acceptable in a case where the mother's life is at stake. And we are in a situation where the lives of untold millions on the planet Earth are at stake. So, right off the bat, if it's meant as an allegory, it fails because it completely screwed the stakes. Because normally the debate would be life of the child versus life of the parent. And now it's life of the child versus millions, if not billions of lives. And that's not what the debate in reality is. So if it's meant as an allegory, it fails on its face, just on premise. So that's the first problem with that. if it is intended. And again, if it isn't, they really needed to take another pass and scrub some of the things on here, because the fact that arguments against killing it are things like, but it's a baby. It's not doing anything harmful. It doesn't mean to hurt anybody. You don't have a right to kill it. These are pro-life arguments. And I'm not here to debunk or try and settle pro-choice versus pro-life. But it uses language that evokes that debate. So if that was not the intent, then they screwed up there. They screwed up one of two ways. Either in failing to have a properly constructed allegory, or in failing to realize that they'd created one unintentionally. Either one of those should have been caught and corrected. I'm not sure which it is, but somewhere they screwed up. And I also don't know what the moral on this is supposed to be. It's really weird, because Clara and Courtney make their arguments. If it was a democratic system, they outvote, the woman who's there with the bomb, but it's not. She basically puts it to the planet. The entire planet says, kill this thing, and she then disregards it. So I don't know what to think about Clara in this situation, because she's clearly just on a moral high horse and has already decided what the right thing to do is. And if everyone in the world says, no, that's not the right thing to do, she's still gonna do it anyway and save this thing. And if she's already determined that, it's kind of just cowardly. I was gonna say patronizing, but it's not. It's cowardly that she would even put it up to a vote, because she intends to override it anyways. But she doesn't want to be put in that position. She's hoping that they will bail her out. And I don't get what this is trying to say about Clara. I'm not sure it says anything about the strength of her character convictions, because she tries to cheap out, to not have to make that call herself. She's hoping that they will side with her and make that choice easier for her, and when they don't, she does ultimately make it. And so ultimately it feels like a wash. She's strong enough by her convictions to ultimately override the desire of literally every other person on the planet, but she is weak enough in her convictions at the same time to not just put her foot down and say, this is what it is. I guess in some ways it's a very human response, hoping that you won't have to make the tough decision, but ultimately I feel like it's not really telling us anything about her all that much, and it feels like it should. So that's part of the problem. I don't know what the Doctor was trying to accomplish when he left. I do like some of the things that get said when he makes the decision to leave. When he says, I can't just make these decisions for you. I can't just change things on a whim. We went to dinner in Berlin in 1937. We didn't pop off after pudding and kill Hitler. And you wouldn't expect me to do that. And the future is no more malleable than the past as far as the Doctor is concerned. That's a decent argument. Inconsistent with how the Doctor has been and behaved across the run of the show, but internally consistent for the episode and a decent way of presenting that argument. But it only works within the bubble of this episode. And it's... So here was the thing that made me lose it. First time I watched this, and it's just as stupid. It's not the fact that the moon is an egg. It's not the fact that there is this ham-fisted, debate that is either a poorly handled allegory or an accidental allegory that somebody should have caught. It's not even that the moon cracks open and crumbles to dust instead of having shrapnel rain down on Earth. None of that is great, but all that I'd be like, eh. What made me go, are you kidding me? When I saw this for the first time, and again, on this rewatch, is that the space dragon, which is just what I'm going to call it, immediately after being born, lays another egg. The same size, about. Maybe a little smaller. It laid an egg that looked bigger than it was. And it sure as heck didn't look born pregnant. And it removes any consequences at all. And that ultimately, especially if this is meant to be an allegory for abortion, that is what completely fails and brings it down to everything, is the lack of consequences. Because look, let's for the moment say that this is intended to be an allegory for abortion. That decision to either bring a pregnancy to term or to abort, either choice has consequences. Personal, deep, emotional consequences, as well as severe logistic consequences. So to do an allegorical story on abortion where there are no consequences is to completely misunderstand the issue at hand. Because anyone who's ever been in that position, neither choice is easy, and it is a difficult thing to make. But whatever you choose, there are consequences for that. There is no obvious, we do this and everything's fine choice if you're in a position where that option is on the table. So that's where it completely falls down. And even if it isn't an allegory for abortion, the fact that Clara just overrode the desires of literally the entire planet, that should have consequences. Even if we're not doing an allegory for abortion, that should have consequences. But it doesn't. Because the moon, no part of the moon crashes. The moon's not even gone. It's immediately replaced with another egg moon. What? Because at the very least, there should have been the consequence of, we have no moon anymore, the tides don't happen anymore, this will impact the planet. We are going to have to learn how to change and adapt and deal with a changed world because the moon and the impact of the moon on this planet have been with us for the entire history of our species, and now it's gone. Oh no, wait, it isn't, it's still there. I hate big event with no consequence. If you're not going to have consequence, do not do an event that big. I have the same problem with The Last of the Time Lords and the rolling back of the years so that the entire invasion of Earth basically doesn't happen and like only, 6 people remember what happened. If you're not going to play out the consequences, don't do something that big. Just don't. Because if you do, if you're going to destroy the moon, you have to have consequences. Not go, oh, well, thank goodness this thing was born pregnant and immediately laid an egg in the exact same freaking place it was just born.
How stupid do you think I am?
That having been said, I really like the argument between the Doctor and Clara. It is emotional. It is heated. It feels justified. That's a really good scene. And I like that Clara goes to Danny to basically tell him that the doctor pushed me into a situation that was not okay. And I was not okay with, because she promised him that she would do that if the doctor ever did that to her. And he did, and she kept that promise. I like that as well. There aren't any consequences on the grand narrative, but there are some consequences to the Doctor and Clara's relationship. In theory, because the next episode kicks off and they're just together on an adventure. Like it's treated like, oh, well, this is the last one. But I'm sorry, if you have a complete and total breakdown of a relationship in a way that feels like immense emotional abuse, you don't go on one more trip. So even that scene, which is a good scene and is well played, the consequences don't last. Man, this thing's frustrating. Kill the Moon! You rewatched it lately? If you did, what'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something on down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Usual stuff to do. You know what it is. Like, subscribe, Patreon. That's really kind of big right now. The assistance is kind of needed. But if you're not able to, liking, commenting, sharing, all that stuff still helps. And I've got social media links and other things down there. Give them a look or don't. End of the day, you're the council, I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.